The story of Diesel Dave Kiley doesn't begin with fame, wealth, or the roar of monster trucks tearing across the desert. It begins in grease-stained garages, with a young man who had more scars on his hands than dollars in his pocket. Dave wasn't born into privilege. He clawed his way up from the bottom, fueled by adrenaline, stubbornness, and an unshakable obsession with machines. He wasn't afraid of risk. In fact, he chased it. He lived on the edge, fixing trucks with parts that barely held together, pulling stunts that left engines screaming, and laughing even when failure was just one wrong move away. He earned the nickname Diesel Dave, not because it sounded catchy, but because he embodied it. Diesel ran in his veins. While most people saw trucks as vehicles, Dave saw them as war machines, metal beasts that could be pushed beyond their limits if you had the guts to try. That reckless energy became both his blessing and his curse. Everything changed the day he crossed paths with Heavy D Sparks. Together, they were gasoline and fire, feeding off each other's intensity. Heavy D had vision, Dave had charisma, and together they built something that felt unstoppable. They weren't mechanics anymore. They were creators of chaos, taking ordinary rigs and mutating them into monsters that defied physics. Their backyard antics, filmed on shaky cameras, turned into viral clips. The world hadn't seen anything like it. And then the Diesel brothers were born. What started as a dream between two adrenaline junkies exploded into one of the biggest reality shows on the History Channel. Millions tuned in every week to watch Diesel Dave and Heavy D rip apart engines, push boundaries, and laugh in the face of danger. They weren't just fixing trucks, they were waging war on mediocrity. And Diesel Dave, with his booming laugh and fearless swagger, became the face of it all. But fame has a price. With every season, the builds had to be bigger, the stunts more outrageous, the spectacle more dangerous. What fans saw on television were the victories, the trucks roaring through mud, the impossible giveaways, the bearded giant grinning as if nothing could touch him. What they didn't see was the wreckage left behind. Long nights blurred into mornings. The shop became a battlefield of metal and exhaustion. Dave's body bore the brunt of it, pulled muscles, bruises, and a heart that raced far too fast. He was living on fumes, running full throttle without ever letting off the gas. The fame came fast, but so did the chaos. Paparazzi chased him, tabloids dug into his personal life, and the pressure from sponsors and producers became unbearable. When the cameras turned on, Diesel Dave gave the world a performance. The unbreakable man, the unstoppable force. But when they shut off, he was left with silence, fatigue, and a gnawing sense that the life he was building was devouring him from the inside. Still, he couldn't stop. The adrenaline was addictive, the fans' cheers intoxicating. Every time he stood next to a truck that defied logic, every time he gave away a build that made the crowd erupt, he felt alive again. But it was a dangerous cycle. Each high only pushed him closer to the edge. By the late 2010s, Diesel Dave had become a household name, a hero to fans of diesel culture everywhere. But behind the beard, behind the bravado, there were shadows forming. His health was faltering, the lawsuits were circling, and the empire he had built with his own hands was becoming a cage he couldn't escape. The world only saw the legend. They didn't see the cracks. They didn't see the tragedy quietly stalking him, waiting for the right moment to strike. Fame didn't come softly for Diesel Dave. It came like a freight train with no brakes. Overnight, he went from wrenching on trucks in dusty garages to standing under studio lights, surrounded by cameras, with millions of people watching his every move. The world demanded a spectacle, and Diesel Dave delivered. But the higher he climbed, the heavier the weight became. What started as passion now felt like an addiction, an endless race to outdo himself, to prove that he could go bigger, faster, and louder than anyone else. The show thrived on shock value. Trucks weren't just restored, they were reborn as beasts, lifted sky-high, turbocharged, belching black smoke like dragons ready for war. Giveaways drew in crowds so massive that people camped out just for a chance to see him. Fans idolized Diesel Dave as if he were indestructible. But the cameras didn't show the price of keeping that illusion alive. Behind the grins and high-fives, Dave's body was screaming for mercy. His back ached from long hours under rigs, his joints throbbed, and nights of adrenaline-fueled filming left him staring at ceilings, unable to sleep. Still, the show demanded more. Producers pushed for bigger builds, crazier stunts, impossible deadlines. Fans wanted the impossible, and Diesel Dave couldn't stand to disappoint them. He pulled all-nighters, guzzled energy drinks, and pushed his body far beyond its limits. It wasn't just work, it was warfare. Every project felt like a battle, every build like a test of survival. The roaring laughter fans adored masked a man who was teetering on the edge. And then came the war no one expected, the government's crackdown. In 2016, the Environmental Protection Agency targeted the Diesel brothers, accusing them of illegally modifying trucks to skirt emissions laws. To the EPA, these builds weren't entertainment, they were violations of the Clean Air Act. But for Diesel Dave, the lawsuit was more than legal jargon. It was an ambush. Overnight, the headlines changed. They were no longer just entertainers, they were criminals in the eyes of the law. The lawsuit was brutal. Millions of dollars in fines loomed over their heads. Lawyers drained their bank accounts, court appearances shredded their schedules, and the once light-hearted garage turned into a war room. Dave tried to smile for the fans, to laugh off the storm, but the weight of it nearly crushed him. He could handle pain, exhaustion, even broken bones, but watching the empire he had built teeter on the edge of destruction? That was unbearable. The pressure twisted everything. Relationships inside the shop began to strain. There were arguments, shouting matches, long silences filled with resentment. The cameras never showed the moments when Dave sat alone in the corner, staring at numbers that didn't add up, or when he clenched his fists so tight his knuckles turned white. Heavy D stood by him, but even their brotherhood bent under the strain. Every new headline was another dagger, every court summons another reminder that fame could turn into a curse overnight. Meanwhile, the demands of fame didn't slow down. Social media screamed for updates. Fans wanted more giveaways, more outrageous builds. Dave plastered on the smile, played the role of the bearded daredevil, and hid the truth. He was unraveling. His body ached, his mind was consumed with stress, and his soul was being chipped away piece by piece. The man who had once loved the smell of diesel now sometimes couldn't stand to walk into the shop. The lawsuit dragged on for years, and each day it felt like more than money was being stripped away. It was his peace of mind, his sense of purpose, his very identity. Diesel Dave, the unbreakable giant, was becoming Dave Kiley, the man crushed beneath the weight of expectations he could no longer control. The curse of fame had found him, and there was no outrunning it. By the late 2010s, he had built an empire on adrenaline and spectacle, but the cracks were spreading. His health was faltering, lawsuits drained his spirit, and the joy that once drove him had curdled into exhaustion. Fame had promised glory, but in its shadow lurked something darker, a tragedy waiting to happen. The storm around Diesel Dave didn't erupt overnight. It built slowly, gnawing at him day by day, until he found himself spiraling into a darkness he could no longer ignore. From the outside, fans still saw the giant grin, the booming laughter, the guy who turned trucks into monsters and lived like a king. But behind the cameras, behind the smoke and noise, his world was crumbling. The empire that once fueled his passion was now draining him dry. The health issues came first. Diesel Dave had always lived hard and fast, guzzling energy drinks, working 20-hour days, ignoring pain as if it were just another obstacle to bulldoze through. But the human body doesn't forgive, and his body was breaking down. His joints screamed after long days in the shop, his back throbbed from years of lifting heavy parts, and his chest tightened with a pressure that felt like someone was squeezing the life out of him. At night, he lay awake, heart pounding, mind racing, unable to escape the relentless cycle of worry. He brushed it off as exhaustion, but deep down, he knew something darker was at work. The mental toll was even worse. The lawsuits, the critics, the financial strain, they dug into him like claws. He laughed for the cameras, but off-screen, he fought waves of anxiety that left him short-tempered and volatile. Depression lurked in the shadows, a constant whisper telling him he wasn't enough, that the empire was slipping through his fingers. His once electric energy began to dim, replaced with bursts of anger and crushing silence. Friends noticed. Family noticed. But Diesel Dave didn't want to talk about it. The world knew him as invincible. How could he admit he was falling apart? Rumors began to swirl. Fans on forums whispered that he looked sick, that his weight fluctuated, that the sparkle in his eyes seemed duller than before. Some speculated he was hiding injuries. Others wondered if he was battling something even darker, addiction, breakdown, or worse. Diesel Dave ignored it all, burying himself in work, pushing harder, as if building another monster truck could silence the demons clawing at him. But it never did. The roar of engines couldn't drown out the noise in his head. Financial struggles made everything worse. The EPA lawsuit had drained millions, and while the show still pulled in viewers, the money wasn't infinite. Side businesses faltered, and the weight of debt pressed down like a vice. Every decision carried risk. One bad deal, one failed project, and everything could come crashing down. It wasn't just trucks on the line, it was his future, his family's stability, his very identity as Diesel Dave. The pressure grew unbearable, and the man who once laughed at risk now felt haunted by it. Relationships began to fracture. Friends who had once shared beers in the garage drifted away, tired of the constant chaos. Family begged him to slow down, to take care of himself before it was too late. But slowing down felt like failure. So he pushed everyone away, throwing himself deeper into the only thing he thought he could control: the builds, the trucks, the spectacle. It was his drug, his escape, and also his prison. Behind closed doors, Diesel Dave wasn't the fearless daredevil fans adored. He was a man pacing the floor at 3 a.m., staring at bills, staring at walls, fighting demons that no one else could see. He was a man who sometimes exploded in anger at those closest to him, only to collapse later in regret. He was a man who once felt unstoppable, now drowning in his own success. The spiral was brutal, relentless. His smile became a mask, his energy a performance. He was Diesel Dave on screen, but off-screen, he was Dave Kiley, exhausted, broken, and running out of gas. The tragedy wasn't just creeping closer, it was already inside his life, eating away at him piece by piece. The fans still cheered, the engines still roared, but the man who had once stood like a giant was crumbling in the shadows, and few even noticed. The night Diesel Dave finally broke was like any other, or at least that's what he told himself. The cameras were gone, the crew had left, and the shop was silent except for the metallic echo of tools hitting concrete. He was alone with a half-finished build, pushing himself long after exhaustion had taken over. His hands were shaking, his breath ragged, but he refused to stop. The lawsuit was still hanging over him, debts were piling up, and his fans expected more. Slowing down felt like defeat. But as the hours dragged on, his body made a decision his mind had been too stubborn to face. The first wave hit like a hammer to the chest. His vision blurred, his arms went weak, and the wrench clattered from his grip onto the shop floor. For a moment, he thought it was just fatigue, another sleepless night catching up to him. But then the pain intensified, sharp, crushing, radiating through his chest like a fire he couldn't put out. His knees buckled, and the man the world knew as indestructible dropped to the cold concrete, gasping for air. The garage, once his sanctuary, now felt like a coffin closing in. Someone found him hours later, sprawled beside the truck he had been working on. By the time the ambulance arrived, Diesel Dave was barely conscious. Sirens wailed as the bearded giant, always the life of the party, always the one laughing the loudest, lay strapped to a gurney, oxygen mask over his face, his eyes wide with a fear he couldn't hide. Fans had seen him jump trucks, pull off stunts, and survive explosions, but this was different. This wasn't staged. This was life or death. At the hospital, doctors wasted no time. Tests revealed what Diesel Dave had been ignoring for years. His body was breaking under the weight of stress, exhaustion, and relentless abuse. His heart was strained, dangerously so. His blood pressure spiked to terrifying levels, his body crying out for a rest he had denied it for too long. The diagnosis was chilling. Keep living this way, and he was one step away from a fatal heart attack. For the first time in his life, Diesel Dave wasn't in control. He couldn't laugh it off, couldn't shrug it away with a joke or a wild stunt. Lying in that hospital bed, wires running from his chest, machines beeping in steady rhythm, he was forced to confront the truth. The persona of Diesel Dave might have been invincible, but Dave Kiley was just a man, flesh, bone, and a heart that was dangerously close to giving out. The tragedy wasn't just the collapse itself. It was the haunting image of his family gathered at his bedside, their faces etched with fear. His wife's tears, his children's wide, frightened eyes, those were wounds deeper than any lawsuit, deeper than any injury. 4 years, They had begged him to slow down, to take care of himself. Now, as he lay motionless under hospital lights, they wondered if they were about to lose him forever. News of his hospitalization leaked, sparking rumors and speculation. Fans online traded theories. Was it a heart attack? Was Diesel Dave hiding a disease? Was this the end of the Diesel brothers? The man who had built his legend on strength now faced the humiliation of being seen as fragile. For someone who had always been larger than life, the idea of weakness was its own kind of death. In that sterile hospital room, Diesel Dave realized that his empire had nearly killed him. The trucks, the fame, the lawsuits, the endless chase for more, all of it had pushed him to the edge. He wasn't staring at another build deadline or another lawsuit now. He was staring at mortality itself. And for a man who had always lived in the fast lane, the sudden, terrifying question became unavoidable. Would slowing down be enough to save him, or was the damage already done? Walking out of the hospital was supposed to feel like victory, but for Diesel Dave it felt more like walking away from a battlefield, scarred and shaken. He had survived, but the fight wasn't over. His body bore the weight of every sleepless night, every reckless stunt, every ignored warning. The doctors had made it clear, keep pushing like before and the next collapse wouldn't just end in a hospital bed, it would end in the morgue. That reality clung to him like a shadow, a reminder that he was no longer untouchable. For weeks, Dave struggled with the idea of slowing down. The man who once thrived on adrenaline and chaos now had to measure his steps, watch his diet, listen to doctors who told him to take it easy. But how do you tell Diesel Dave to take it easy? The fans didn't want easy. They wanted explosions, monster builds, outrageous stunts. He had built an empire on never saying no, on living like tomorrow didn't exist. Now tomorrow was the very thing he had to protect. The fallout was brutal. Business partners worried. Fans questioned his strength. Online forums exploded with debates. Was Diesel Dave finished? Some accused him of faking for attention, while others whispered that he had been hiding his fragility all along. The man once seen as a diesel-fueled superhero was now dissected like a fallen fighter, his scars on full display. Fame had turned against him, and the spotlight that once made him larger than life now made every weakness glaringly visible. At home, things were no easier. His family, relieved that he was alive, lived with constant fear that it could all happen again. Every time Dave pushed himself too hard, every time he brushed off a headache or fatigue, their worry returned. His children, once proud to call their dad a TV star, now clung to him with a quiet fear that he might not be around much longer. For Dave, that was the real heartbreak, realizing that his chase for glory had nearly robbed them of a father. But Diesel Dave wasn't built to surrender. Slowly, painfully, he began to rebuild his life. The trucks were still there, the build still wild, but his approach changed. He learned to delegate, to step back when his body demanded rest. He leaned on faith and family more than ever, drawing strength not from adrenaline but from survival. The stunts became fewer, the smiles quieter, but they carried a depth they hadn't before. He wasn't just performing for fans anymore, he was fighting to live. The lawsuit eventually ended, leaving financial scars that would take years to heal. But in its wake, Dave found a new voice. He began speaking about the toll of overwork, about the dangers of fame's false invincibility. Fans who once admired him for his strength now respected him for his honesty. He had become something far rarer in the world of reality TV, a man who admitted that he had been broken and who showed the courage it took to rebuild. Today, Diesel Dave's legacy isn't just the trucks or the television fame. It's the cautionary tale of what happens when you live in the fast lane for too long, when the chase for more nearly consumes you. To some fans, he will always be the larger-than-life daredevil with the booming laugh. To others, he is a survivor, proof that even giants can fall and rise again. But to himself, Dave Kiley knows the truth. The greatest build of his life wasn't a truck, or a stunt, or even the empire of Diesel brothers. It was pulling himself back from the brink of tragedy and learning, at last, to live. If this darker look into Diesel Dave's heartbreaking tragedy gripped you, make sure to smash that like button, subscribe for more raw, untold stories, and ring the bell so you never miss the next deep dive.